Hey everybody, happy Blockheads Wednesday. We are on week 12 of Blockheads 5, group 2, and I'm so excited because this week our guest designer is Heather Briggs of My So Quilty Life. She's not only new to being a Blockheads designer, she is one of Moda's new fabric designers. Her first collection, Flower Girl, debuted back in the fall, and we're just thrilled to have her as part of the Moda family. Her Starling block this week is a really cute original design. It's a star and a flower together, which is very much in Heather's wheelhouse. She loves flowers, and if you've seen Flower Girl, it's a wonderful floral collection. So I'm very excited to see her Starling block this week. And looking forward to making this one with you. This one has so many great options for putting different fabric placements and getting lots of different effects. So I'm looking forward to seeing Robin's color studies as well. I've got my block finished here. This is my version of Starling, and I just love it. I had a lot of fun making this one. We are going to be making some stitch and flip corners this week, and this week, instead of showing you any notions, I'm going to be talking to you about pressing and doing different pressing directions. So let's dive into the pattern and get started sewing. Once again, lots of color options on our block this week, and I'm going to be using 4 different prints. So I'm going to use this lighter print for my little outside triangles. So that is going to be B. So those are my B squares. And then for this sort of ring around the star flower, I'm using this green print. So that's going to be my A squares, my G rectangles, and my F squares for our little tiny little stitch and flip corners here. Then for this border around the star, I'm using the purple print. So these are going to be my D rectangles and my C squares for the corner units here. And so that's the purple. And then my inner star right here is with this kind of caramelly butterscotch print. And that's my E squares and my H square. Our primary technique this week is going to be stitch and flip. We're going to use stitch and flip corners for these corner units, and we're going to use stitch and flip for our little rectangle units here that make the star flower points. So if you wanted to use Doug Lico's mini simple folded corners ruler, which I showed in the week 11 block video, you absolutely could do that. This week, I'm just going to be talking about pressing and how your pressing direction impacts what fabrics really pop in your block. I don't always give you pressing instructions in our blocks every week, and I know that sometimes folks are looking for pressing instructions, and the reason that I don't always give you those pressing instructions is that I don't want you to feel locked into having to press a certain way. It really just depends on how you want your fabrics to pop in your block, or it might depend on if you need to get a little bit more of a point when you're joining some units together. Sometimes how you press your block will help you achieve more of a point, or it will kind of correct some little issues in your sewing depending on how you press. So we like to give you the freedom to use whatever works best for your block and for your sewing. But this week I do give you some pressing instructions, and it's just one way, and it's going to make your fabrics kind of lay a particular way in the block. So I'm going to show you what it looks like to press in different directions for these units. The first step of our block today is to make our A, B, C units, and that's going to be all stitch and flip. So I'm going to take my A square and my B square, and I'm going to line those up right sides together, and I'm going to sew from point to point here, and then trim and flip it out. And then I'll repeat that process on the opposite corner with my C square. So let me start by putting my B squares on top of my A squares and sewing those and pressing those out, and then we'll move on to the next part of the step. Okay, I've stitched my B square on top of my A square, and as you can see, I'm just the tiniest bit to the right of what is point to point. So I do a scant seam on these because I want to account for the width of my thread when I press this back. So after I trim here and I press this out, see, I have a nice full amount of my triangle there. If I was really right on point, I might end up being just a little bit short. So this is why I do kind of a scant seam when I'm sewing corner to corner like this. Also, when I am trimming blocks like this, I don't bust out my rotary cutter to trim these. I just use my fabric shears. I can just kind of eyeball my 1/4 inch seam, and it's a whole lot faster than having to line up my rotary cutter and ruler. So now I'll trim the rest of these and I'll press my triangles out, and also I'll repeat the process with the C triangle on this bottom right corner. Okay, my ABC units are sewn and ready to trim. I'm trimming mine to 2.5 inches because I'm making the 6-inch block. If you're making the 12-inch block, you're going to trim to 4.5 inches. So here's a tip for trimming down units that are made with stitch and flip. So for me, this green fabric, that was my A square, and that was my base square, okay? And it was 2.5 inches to start. So I want to use the corners of my base square to line up the corner of my ruler when I'm trimming. So I want to make sure that I've got the corner of this top right corner of my A square here lined up with the top right corner of my ruler, and that's how I'm going to line it up to trim. You can see I have just a little bit to trim, not too much at all. But you want to make sure you do that versus lining it up with the corner of whatever your corner fabric is. So always use the corner of your base square and line it up with the corner of your ruler. So I will trim these all to 2.5 inches, and then I'll be able to start on the next step. Okay, my ABC units are sewn and pressed and trimmed, and so these are ready to set aside. Now before I do that, let's take a look on these, my traditional version. I have pressed the corners out, okay? So that is going to recess my green fabric a little bit, so it kind of goes into the background just a little bit. For my Americana block, I've done the opposite. I have pressed towards that center strip, and so it kind of pops just a little bit more. Now, will this make a huge difference after my project is quilted? Probably not too much of a difference, or not that huge of a difference, but it might make a little bit of a difference. And it's definitely going to look different when my blocks are put together. So this is just something to think about. You know, the easiest way to press is to press these corner units out. But if you really want the fabric in the middle here to stand out a little bit more, you might press your seams towards that center fabric. Since this is a lighter fabric and not too much of a difference between it and my corner fabric here, I just wanted this one to stand out, the sort of pink to stand out a little bit more. So I wanted to show you guys the difference that pressing makes in terms of how your fabric looks in your block. All right, these are ready to set aside and move on to the next step. Okay, for step 2, we're going to make our DEF units, and these are going to form the points of our little star flower. And just like last week, we have to pay attention to the direction of where we're placing our stitch and flip corners for our left rectangles versus our right rectangles. So pay attention to the diagram here. So for our left rectangles, we'll have the smallest square, the F square, is going to go in the top right corner, and our E square is going to go in the bottom left corner. For our right unit, the F square is going to go in the top left corner, and the E square is going to go in the bottom right corner. So again, this is all shown in the diagram on your pattern. So just make sure you're paying attention to that as you do your stitch and flip. So I'm going to repeat the process and do my stitch and flip for these units. And I'm going to show you the difference in how the pressing direction impacts how you can assemble these two units. Okay, I've got a left and a right unit assembled. These have been stitched and trimmed to the correct size for the 6-inch block. And they've been pressed per the pattern instructions. So per the pattern instructions for the left units, you're going to press towards your D rectangle. So this, what will end up being this center strip of fabric here. And then for your right unit, you will press towards the E and the F corners. And the reason that we have you do that is so that you can nest those seams when you're joining your blocks together. So I will join these two together and show you what that looks like. Okay, here is that unit joined together, and you can see the seams nested very nicely. And so now I can decide, before I press this unit, I can decide how I want to press the seam, and I can just sort of look and see if it makes a difference whether I press one way or the other. So it looks like if I press this way, this seam, this point might just be a little bit off. And if I press this way, same thing. So I might press these open and I might get a better result that way. So that's why we take a look at our seams before we decide if we're going to press, or which direction we're going to press towards, because it sometimes makes a difference in the final appearance of the block. Now for my actual blocks, I decided that I wanted to press all of my units for my traditional block towards the D rectangle. I didn't want to have it alternating like that. So you see here, the E square is a little bit more pronounced, but I wanted my purple fabric to stand out just like I did in my corner units. So I decided to press all of my units towards this D rectangle, and I still was able to match up my seams just fine. And again, I'm going to press these seams open. I think there's enough bulk in these that I would prefer to press the seams open. Oops. Now for my Americana block, I did the reverse because I wanted this pink fabric to stand out a little bit more. So here I pressed both, for both my left and right units, I pressed towards the corner triangles. And so this blue kind of plaid fabric is recessed just a little bit, but I still was able to match everything up. And once again, I'm going to press these units open. So I'll press all of my units open, and then I can attach the G rectangle to the top here. Okay, I joined my left and right units and I pressed those seams open. And then the next step is to add the G rectangle to the top of that joined unit. So I've done that. And I wanted to press again towards the rectangle units because I wanted my purple fabric to be a little bit more prominent. So I used my Easy Press pen to get a nice flat seam here because there is a fair amount of bulk. For my Americana blocks, I'm wanting this pink fabric to stand out a little bit more, so I just pressed towards the D rectangle, or the G rectangle. So now that these units are all done and trimmed up, I'm ready to lay out my block and start assembling. Okay, I've got my block all laid out and it's ready to assemble. So when I sew my units together into rows, I'm going to press towards the corner units for my top and bottom row. And then for the center unit, I'm going to press towards the center H square. Okay, here it is, my finished Starling block. And wow, this is such a cute block. I love how it turned out. So for this version, I pressed the corner units. When I was making these, I pressed the corners out so that green fabric is a little bit recessed and my purple fabric stands out just a little bit more, because I also pressed towards that purple fabric when I was making these rectangle units. And then I pressed towards the corner units as I was sewing the units together into rows. And I pressed towards the center unit, the center square here for this center row. So my seams nested really nicely as I was sewing my rows together. Now I made my Americana block too, and I pressed differently on this one. So you can kind of see that this center fabric here in my corner units, it stands out a little bit more compared to the green fabric in my traditional block. And that's because I pressed the seams towards that center fabric when I was making those corner units. So I just wanted to kind of show you guys in today's video kind of how pressing your fabric makes a difference in the final outcome of your block. And that's why we let you choose kind of where you want to press your fabric, unless it really makes a huge difference. And then we'll share that information in the pattern. But otherwise, if we don't give you pressing instructions, it's because the choice is really kind of up to you. Starling is such a fun block. Thank you so much, Heather, for giving us this awesome design. I can't wait to see everyone's versions of Starling. There's just so many options in this one, and this is another block that would make a great quilt all by itself. I could see a whole quilt made out of this block. So I hope that you will post your versions of Starling in our Facebook group. If you haven't joined us on Facebook yet, please join our group and join the discussion. There's always great inspiration pics in our Facebook group. Everyone's making such fantastic blocks as we go along every week. So join us there, and be sure to use the hashtag Moda Blockheads5 if you're posting your blocks on Instagram. Thanks so much for watching this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.